Today's video, we're going to start putting the parts back on the engine, the intake manifold, the belts, some of the pulleys, the air tubing, battery, O2 sensor. So we're going to go and put all the accessories back on the engine, put it all back together, get it all buttoned up, see if we can get it to start at the end. Now, we did do this rebuild only just for you guys on YouTube. So we're actually not going to be running the engine, but we will start it, turn it over, just to kind of make sure that it does run. We put it back together, everything's, all the bolts. That's what's really cool about doing a job like this. If you have everything situated and you have all your nuts and bolts and hardware put together, you should have absolutely no bolts left over. They should all be back in their original location. So there was only one bolt that we didn't put back in this engine, partly because it's stripped out. Actually, two bolts, one on the flywheel that we had to replace, and then also one on the exhaust manifold underneath the car. So, other than that, every other bolt should go back in the car. So we're gonna go ahead and get started, put everything back together, and hopefully we can fire it up. Okay, now our next step, we're going to hook up the exhaust. It's only 3 bolts, 13 millimeter. Got to get that thing lined up in position. Try not to break the gasket. For some reason it doesn't want to line up. It was perfect a minute ago, but something happened. Alright, so I got to readjust it, but we just need to tighten up the exhaust manifold bracket there, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so we got the exhaust manifold bolted up, and there's a bracket underneath the oil pump, underneath the oil pan. They need to remove that little bracket that connects the block to the transmission, and then there's a little bolt. See if I can take it down there and show you what I'm talking about. So right here, you have that little bracket that has to connect to this piece of aluminum. So you need to remove that, lighten that bolt down, tighten everything up, cinch up the exhaust bolts, and then we're done from underneath. Okay, the next thing we need to put in is the battery tray. Okay, and it's positioned just like this. And it bolts right to the frame. 2 bolts right here. And you see here. Yeah, so there's a bracket that comes across the bottom. So there's a bolt that comes from the fender in. Okay, and then there's 2 bolts right here. And that connects the battery bracket to the car. Okay, now we're going to put the fan in, and it only has 1 bolt, so it just pretty much pivots. We get it into position here. Okay, this has 1 bolt right here. The rest just pretty much slides down, pivots into place. 1 bolt here. Gonna put that in now. So I hooked up this sensor, or this tube, that comes from the overflow canister. It comes around, connected, it's got an 8mm here. Come down, it's got a 10mm clamp bolt right here. And then just a line wrench. Now I'm going to hook up the O2 sensor and just thread it in. And I'm just going to use a 22mm combination wrench to tighten that down. Then I will just plug it in to the O2 sensor line, which is right here. Okay. We'll just plug that in, and then this one goes to the fan. Alright, so I hooked up the O2 sensor, connected it, and there's also a couple fasteners right here that just kind of hold the wires in place. Then I connected up the fan, which plugs in right down there. So I plugged that in, cables are all ran. Now I got to put on the breather box right here. That's our next step. Now our next step, just going to put on the upper radiator hose. It's easiest to put this in place now before you put on the air resignator. And I'll just tighten those two screws down. Then the air resignator is right here. Okay, it has two bolts here. Actually, it mounts like this, so it has a bolt here, 10mm bolt here, 10mm bolt here, and 10mm bolt here. These two mount right here to the battery bracket, and this one mounts right to the firewall. Okay, so it just goes down like that. But then there's also a sensor, an airflow sensor. I believe this is just the airbox sensor. So you want to plug that in first. Then we can take and put it into position, and then tighten those two bolts down. Or, sorry, those three bolts. Okay, now we're going to install the air resonator. It's got a little connector here that goes inside this air box where your air filter is. Just goes in there, and then we just have a little plastic clip. And that's done. Now all that's left is we just got to connect these two pieces up. Connect this here, here, and then here. I just got to clamp these. These are kind of awkward, but I just got to clamp those there and there. Put that on there, and I believe we're all done. To show you guys a little trick, use some vice grips to hold those clamps in place. It really makes it a lot easier for you guys. Alright, just finished installing the air tube here. That's pretty much there. Now that's all there is to it. I've done the entire engine rebuild from ground up. Pull it all apart, pull the pistons out, put it all back together. So everything's back in. It does start up and it does run. I wouldn't run it very long without the bearings and stuff in there, but hopefully you guys learned something from the video. Okay, so the engine's all done, all put back together, all put back in the car. I think this took us about 7 different videos. We probably got about 15 hours of footage from start to finish. So hopefully you guys liked what we did. If you have any questions and things that I didn't cover in this video, please put them down in the description box or down in the comment box below, and I'll try to respond to all of them. I do get quite a few comments, so if I don't respond right away, just know that, you know, there are comments that I can't get to right away, so it takes me a little bit of time. But I will respond to all your questions that you ask. So hopefully you guys learned something from this video. That's why we put it together for you. We put the entire engine back together just so you guys on YouTube can see what we did. Have a guy come in and pick this up. We've got to throw the hood on. That's pretty self-explanatory. 4 bolts. It's done. So anyway, let me know what you think, and we'll see you guys on next week's video.